14 years of marriage can make you believe you know someone completely. You know their habits, their moods, their favorite foods, the way they sleep, the things that make them laugh. You know their history, their insecurities, their dreams, and the stories they've told you about their past. You build a house together, you raise children together, you get a dog, you pay bills, survive stressful years, celebrate birthdays, and slowly build the kind of ordinary life that people dream about. That was my life. My wife and I had been married for 14 years. We had 3 children, a house, a dog, and everything that, from the outside, looked like the perfect family life. Then, 2 weeks ago, I discovered that my wife had been having an affair. Not with some random guy she met at work, not with a stranger, with the man she had been obsessed with 20 years ago, the man she hadn't seen in 2 decades, and suddenly 14 years of marriage felt like it had been built on top of a story I never completely understood. Before she met me, my wife had been in love with this guy. She was apparently completely consumed by him. When he moved to Chile, she actually left Canada, leaving behind her family and everything familiar because she wanted to be with him. But when she got there, she discovered that he already had a girlfriend. He still slept with her a few times, but eventually rejected her. He chose someone else. Years later, she met me. We fell in love, got married, and built our life together. For years, I thought that chapter of her life was finished, but there was always something strange about the way she talked about him. Whenever she went through one of her depressive periods, she would sometimes compare me to him. She would talk about how passionate he was, how intense their relationship had been, how different things felt with him. I never thought she was going to cheat. I thought it was just nostalgia, a romanticized memory from a completely different time in her life. Looking back, I wonder if I should have taken those comments more seriously. There were other complications too. My wife had been smoking weed every single day for around 20 years. It had become so normal that neither of us really treated it as a major problem anymore. Then, about a year and a half ago, she started working as a nurse in an emergency department. That job changed her. She started seeing things most people couldn't imagine. Trauma, injuries, people dying, families getting terrible news. She was exposed to horrific situations on a regular basis. Instead of getting professional help, she started smoking even more. She also began going out regularly with a group of childless friends. She'd leave around 10 at night and sometimes wouldn't come home until 8 in the morning. There were nights involving clubs, dancing, alcohol, and eventually drugs. Her friends introduced her to Molly, and somehow, while all of this was happening, I had no idea that something much bigger was taking place. My wife reconnected with her ex, and over the course of about 5 weeks, they had an affair, 3 encounters, 3 times they slept together, unprotected. The man eventually ended it, not because he suddenly realized what he was doing was wrong, not because he decided my wife deserved better. He apparently ended it because he was finished and had another girlfriend. The irony is almost impossible to process. The man my wife had once abandoned everything for had rejected her again 20 years later, except this time she was married. She had 3 children. She had a husband. She had a home. She had an entire life, and she still went back to him. I discovered everything almost by accident. I was using her computer to work on some insurance invoices, something I'd done plenty of times before. I wasn't looking for evidence. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't trying to catch her. Then I found information that led me down a rabbit hole, and suddenly the truth was sitting in front of me. Messages, dates, details, the affair, 5 weeks, 3 encounters, the ex from 20 years ago. I felt physically sick, but the hardest part wasn't even the sex. It was realizing how much emotional history was attached to this particular man. This wasn't simply cheating. It felt like she had reopened a wound that had been sitting underneath our marriage for years. When I confronted her, she didn't seem to know how to explain herself. Her behavior over the following weeks became incredibly difficult to understand. One moment she'd try to justify what happened. The next she'd be on the floor hyperventilating, crying, and saying she didn't know why she'd done it. Sometimes she'd become almost completely unresponsive. There was one period where she barely moved or spoke for around 5 hours. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, she'd be sitting at the table doing a puzzle. She cried constantly. She begged me to give our marriage another chance. She told me she loved me. She told me she regretted everything. She said the affair meant nothing compared with our family, and I wanted desperately to understand whether there was something psychologically wrong that could explain what had happened. Her parents contacted me. They told me they had suspected for years that she might have bipolar disorder. I spoke with my therapist and doctor and described some of the behavior I'd witnessed, particularly how extreme her moods could become under stress. They also thought there might be an underlying issue that needed professional evaluation. She stopped smoking weed weed. She stopped going out with those friends. She started seeing a therapist. She also had a psychiatric appointment scheduled to evaluate her for possible bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. And that's where everything became even more complicated, because what if there really was a mental health problem? Would that change what she had done? Would it make the betrayal less real? Would a diagnosis somehow make me responsible for staying? I couldn't answer those questions. I still can't. I know she is remorseful. I know she's suffering. I know she's trying to get help, but I also know that I am the person who has to live with what happened. I'm the one who has to look at our children and wonder how much of our family life can ever feel normal again. And I'm the one who can't stop thinking about that man. The man she once crossed an ocean for. The man who rejected her 20 years ago. The man she compared me to during some of her darkest periods. The man she eventually slept with again while married to me. A few nights ago, she held my face in her hands and looked directly into my eyes. She told me she loved me. She said I was the love of her life. She said she didn't love him. She said she finally understood that he didn't care about her and probably never had. She called him a mess. She said she couldn't believe she'd thrown away so much for someone like him. And for a moment, I just stared at her because I remembered something. 5 years earlier, I'd asked her about this exact man. I had asked whether she still had feelings for him, and she had held my face almost exactly the same way. She had told me she loved me. She had told me I was the love of her life. She had told me that she didn't love him. Apparently, she didn't even remember saying those exact words to me 5 years ago. That's when something inside me finally broke. Not because I suddenly stopped caring about her, but because I realized I couldn't keep trying to separate the woman I loved from the decisions she had repeatedly made. Maybe she is sick. Maybe there is an underlying condition. Maybe treatment will help her understand herself. Maybe one day she'll become a completely different person. But I can't spend the rest of my life waiting to find out. 14 years of marriage doesn't disappear overnight. Neither do 3 children, a house, memories, holidays, birthdays, and thousands of ordinary moments. But neither does betrayal. Especially this kind. I wanted to forgive her. I genuinely did, but every time I tried to imagine staying, I pictured that man. I pictured the comparisons. I pictured the 5 weeks. I pictured the 3 encounters. And I wondered how I could ever look at my wife without wondering whether some part of her was still chasing the person who rejected her 20 years ago. So this morning I finally told her, our marriage is over. I told her I wanted to begin divorce mediation next week. She cried. She begged me not to do it. And maybe part of me will always feel guilty for walking away. But another part of me knows something very simple. I didn't destroy our marriage. I discovered that it had already been changed by a decision I had never agreed to. I spent 14 years believing that marriage meant choosing each other every day. Now I have to choose myself. And for the first time in a very long time, I don't know what the future looks like, but at least it's mine to decide.